Members of the Legion, a totalitarian slaver society, rule over the southeastern United States, proposing to fight for the greater good.
My legion obeys me even unto death. Why? Because they live to serve the greater good, and they know of no alternatives.
But as tributes are ripped from the hands of its people, and the enslaved warriors are sent to their death in expansionary struggles, it seems the greater good is more accurately what's good for Caesar, Legion's emperor. Does this Fallout Commander Precon reflect what it's like to ruthlessly command such an empire? Let's check it out. The commander is, of course, Caesar Legion's emperor. A 4/4, 1 red, white, and black, legendary human soldier. And you just know he's got combat on his mind with an ability that triggers whenever you attack. Not necessarily with Caesar, but with any creature you control. After all, why would he leave his throne when he's got a standing army that faces death if they show any signs of disobedience? But of course those soldiers are facing death all the same, because that attack trigger gives you the option of sacrificing another creature to select 2 of the 3 listed options. The first option creates 2 1/1 tapped and attacking soldier creature tokens. The second will draw you a card and lose you a life. The final option will have Caesar deal damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to a target opponent. This presents a win condition in the command zone, with all 3 abilities laying out the basic strategy of the deck. Go wide with creature tokens, and always make a calculated attack. If you would, go hit that subscribe button harder than the burned man hit the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Looking at what this commander does, it clearly paints the picture of a man that views all his subjects as expendable, so long as it advances his goals. This is a huge flavor win for the design team that also set him up to be a fearsome enemy. And while you want your commander and 99 to be a fearsome bunch, some of us also want the cards to be worth the price. My LGS is selling each of these decks for $55. So let's take a look at some of the highest value reprints to see if Caesar can stand up to the financial battle. You can find the first reprint of Ruinous Ultimatum in this deck. At the time of recording, the cheapest version of this spell, that destroys all non-land permanents your opponents control, was hovering around $7. One-sided board wipes go hard. As long as you can hit all the pips in the casting cost, this is going to set you up to win the game in short order. I ought to mention, this price and the rest of the prices in this section are the cheapest alternate copy of the card, to reflect the value the community placed on this spell in the recent past. $5 Fervent Charge is also receiving its first reprint. Aligning with this deck's general strategy, this Mardu enchantment rewards you for keeping on the offensive, granting each attacking creature you control +2/+2 until the end of the turn. $5 Pitiless Plunderer, reprinted quite recently in the Ahoy Mateys Precon, can also be found in Caesar's Legion. In any deck, this one included, where your creature's dying is a feature, the Plunderer's treasure token creation can accelerate your game too quickly for anyone else to catch up. $5 Anguished Unmaking is the Orzhov solution to any problem on the table, letting you trade 3 mana and 3 life to exile any single permanent, other than a land. Last spell is the roughly $4 Black Market. This is a fairly costly enchantment at 5 mana, but can ramp you like crazy if you're able to untap with it. Rather than the treasure token from the Plunderer when a creature you control dies, Black Market receives a charge counter when any creature dies, granting you black mana in your pre-combat main phase equal to the number of charge counters. These 5 spells combined are about $26, or almost halfway to the asking price of the deck. As a comparison, the 4-spell reanimation package in the Revenant Recon Precon was $50. The top 5 creature reprints in the Deep Clue C Precon rose to the same total. From that perspective, these reprints simply do not pack the same punch. But there are other considerations. There are far more than the 12 new spells we see in standard precon releases. And given this is set in a universe beyond, they won't be getting reprints, at least for quite some time. There's also the full Fallout reskin of spells that were reprinted. There are dozens of us art enjoyers that are willing to offer up a little more coin to get what we think is a snazzy new piece. Not that these will necessarily rise above previous version prices. The overall point is I wouldn't recommend this as a value buy, the same way I would for the 2 MKM precons I talked about earlier. I think if you decide to purchase this, you should be invested in the theme of the deck, whether it's the Fallout theme or the general strategy. In any case, I certainly wouldn't want you to purchase this product without knowing if it can actually win games, or even be competitive. So join me in a piece-by-piece breakdown of what this deck has to offer, and together we can answer that question. Let's start off with the mana base, which includes a total of 36 lands. We've got the 3 colors with close to an even distribution of production. 16 lands produce white, 17 for black, and 16 for red. There's also a myriad landscape, evolving wilds and terramorphic expanse, which can fix for any of those colors, boosting the total by 3. Those lands and 8 others comprise the 11 lands in the deck that unconditionally enter tapped. This is right around average for a 3-color precon. But narrowed further to 3-color universes beyond precons, 11 is well above the average and actually tied for the highest number you can find. I would posit this as the worst mana base of the 4 Fallout precons. If this were any old cycle of standard precons, I would find myself content with the lands. But given its special UB status, I would say it falls short. As a quick upgrade for pennies, swap out the Temple of Malice, Memorial to Glory, and 2 mountains for an exotic orchard and 3 plains. This cuts the total lands that enter tapped from 11 to 9, and changes the color production to align more closely with the composition of the deck. The interaction in this deck covers all the bases, able to interact with any type of non-land permanent. Anguished Unmaking is the star of the targeted interaction. Wear and Tear can deal with artifacts and enchantments. Powder Ganger only the former. Lethal Scheme can target planeswalkers, and Entrapment Maneuver attacking creatures. Each of these offers relevant upside for this deck that has tokens, but always wants more. v.a.t.s is another star in this section that, funnily enough, would be very strong against this deck. If you want to see more on this spell and other mono-black spells that are new in this Fallout set, check out that card art at the top of the screen. The Wrath portion is more supported, but in a chaotic and I think fun way. Of course there is Ruinous Ultimatum, we talked about before, but also Martial Coup and Hour of Reckoning that can leverage or pay you back token creatures. Vault 75 Middle School is another spell that takes advantage of all the 1/1 creatures you'll be making, pumping them up with counters after exiling all creatures with power 4 or more. Legate Lanius, Caesar's Ace, literally decimates your opponent's creatures. Vault 11, Voter's Dilemma, could draw everyone cards, but can also destroy plenty of creatures. And so you know, yours aren't safe either. Wasteland Raider has Squad, meaning you copy the spell when the squad cost is paid. Similar to a multi-kicker spell, you can pay it as much as you'd like when casting. These guys make each player sacrifice a creature when they ETB. Finally, there is the Nipton Lottery, which is close to a full creature wipe, leaving alive one random creature that you get to play with for the turn. I can't say these are all optimal, but there is enough interaction, and I do think they'll make for some fun gameplay. The ramp package includes 7 pieces of hardware, featuring the new magazine versions of each legal talisman for this deck. Quick sidebar, I feel like for such important pieces in so many commander decks, These talisman artworks never hit. We've had 40k, Lord of the Rings, Doctor Who, and now Fallout, and nothing gets close to the OG printings. Let me know in the comments if you feel differently about these Fallout talismans or what you would have chosen for them instead. We've also got two bobbleheads, Luck and Charisma, as the 3-mana mana rocks. I can say I very much like the art direction for these. The effects, at least in this deck currently constructed, not so much. These get better as you collect more bobbleheads, in this case giving you more shots at treasure or letting you create more creature tokens. There is also the classic Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Non-artifact ramp includes one land, which we've talked about already, Myriad Landscape. One instant, Deadly Dispute, that lets you sacrifice a creature or artifact to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. One enchantment, Black Market, that was among one of the most expensive reprints, and 4 creatures. Keeper of the Accord and Pitiless Plunderer are the 2 creature reprints. Pitiless Plunderer makes treasure, we talked about him before. The Keeper is also no slouch, creating a 1/1 soldier on every opponent's end step if they have more creatures than you, and or putting a tapped basic plains from your library onto the battlefield if they've got more lands. With a 3/4 stat line, he can play a little defense too. Kellogg Dangerous Mind and Rose Cutthroat Raider are the 2 new creatures offering some ramp. Kellogg makes treasure when he attacks. Fortunately, he has First Strike and Haste, letting you recoup 1 of the 3 mana it costs to cast him the very same turn, and keeping him relatively safe. Rose Cutthroat Raider also has First Strike, but more importantly can create up to 3 junk tokens at the end of each of your combat phases, based on how many opponents you attacked. Junk tokens are a new artifact created in this set that can be tapped and sacrificed for free at sorcery speed. This will exile the top card of your library and let you cast it this turn. Rose turns that card advantage from your sacrificed junk into 1 red mana as well. The ramp package focused pretty heavily on making it feel thematic, which I think you can tell by now I do appreciate. And even with that thematic focus, I still think it'll perform well enough out of the box. There are 13 ways to generate card advantage in the deck. That doesn't include the commander, which can turn your sacrificed creatures into a drawn card if you choose. There are 3 overlaps from earlier here: Deadly Dispute, Rose Cutthroat Raider, and Vault 11 Voter's Dilemma. Of the 10 remaining, Skullclamp and Morbid Opportunist are the highlights for me. This deck can pump out plenty of 1/1 creatures, and there's nothing Skullclamp loves more than that. Morbid Opportunist also likes dead creatures, drawing you a card once per turn when 1 or more creatures die. Mysterious Stranger doesn't get you a card exactly, but will let you cast a free spell if at least 2 graveyards have an instant or sorcery. Boomer Scrapper and Thrill Kill Disciple generate junk tokens. Stolen Strategy will exile a card from the top of each opponent's library on your upkeep that you can cast, but only for that turn, and again only cast. This does not let you play lands. EDE Lonesome Eyebot can be sacrificed for 2 mana to draw a card. It will also accumulate quest counters when you attack, adding to that drawn card total. Survivor's Medkit is a gadget artifact that has up to 3 uses. One of those uses is drawing a card. The last 3 are Wild Wasteland, Aradesh the Founder, and Yes Man, Personal Securitron. I talked about these in different videos. I'll throw the playlist up there if you want to know more about them. Even with a commander that can draw cards, I'd say there's room for improvement in this section. The thing is, this deck doesn't really care about artifacts all that much and has no synergies with all of the exiling card advantage spells we see here. There's a small amount of recursion available in the deck list. Martial's Anthem has that buff for all your creatures, and can return as many creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield as you can pay for with that multi-kicker. Desdemona, Freedom's Edge, gives creatures in your graveyard escape when she attacks, if they meet certain criteria. Battle of Hoover Dam either gets you a small mana value creature back every end step, or distributes counters when a creature dies. It's nice to have these tools available, and gives you some leeway on your sacrificing decisions, but I fear these are largely a distraction. There are also 3 protection pieces. General's Enforcer makes all legendary humans indestructible. Including your commander, that's 14 creatures. A little less than half your total creatures, but still a solid total. Survivor's Medkit is back here too, with that very niche protection from rad counters. I'm sure we'll dive into those more in the Mutant Menace review coming out next week, so if you haven't seen what rad counters do yet, feel free to pause and read that handy helper card. The final piece is Diamond City, a brand new land that enters with a shield counter. After 2 or more creatures ETB under your control, you can tap Diamond City to give that shield counter to any creature of your choice. It's probably not wise to expect a healthy amount of protection in a precon, and this one is in line with those expectations. Now it's time to get deck specific with the Recruiters, cards that make creature tokens or give payoffs for creature tokens. The Armory, spells that temporarily or permanently make our creatures more powerful. The Vanguard, creatures on the front line that you want to be attacking with to get their individual value or collect the rewards from their death. And finally, the Legion, spells that can hang back but get their value from your creatures engaging in combat, or encourage multiple creatures of yours to attack. The Recruiter cards we've already touched on are Memorial to Glory, a land that I really want no part of. General's Enforcer, which has the protection piece, but can also do a little graveyard hate to create soldiers. Martial Coup, the board wipe with creature token upside. Charisma Bobblehead, that taps 4 mana, or to create soldiers. Yes Man, Personal Securitron, that spawns soldiers when it leaves the battlefield. Entrapment Maneuver, that functions as removal and token creation. Keeper of the Accord, that ramps and makes soldiers. Thrill Kill Disciple has that squad ability. Vault 11, Voter's Dilemma, makes you up to 3 soldiers. Finally, Wasteland Raiders also makes use of the squad ability. As you can tell, there are plenty of cards that fall into multiple categories in this section, and there will be overlap in future sections as well. I'll share the deck list in the description so you can take a closer look for yourself. Secure the Wastes has a solid rate of return, granting a 1 warrior per mana ratio after your initial 1 white investment. Gary Clone has the squad ability to create copies of itself when cast. Impassioned Orator will gain you a life every time a creature ETBs under your control. Securitron Squadron also has the squad ability and will also be found in the Armory section with its counter distribution. Bastion of Remembrance creates you a soldier on ETB with plenty more upside. Mr. House, President and CEO, will make you robots when you roll a 4 or higher on any die. Overseer of Vault 76 gets quest counters when small creatures ETB under your control, and can turn those quest counters from her or another creature you control into power. Ruthless Rad Rat has the squad ability, a non-mana squad ability at that. Heroic Reinforcements will get you 2 soldiers and power up your squad. White Glove Gourmand creates 2 soldiers on ETB. Assemble the Legion will muster up more and more soldiers as the game progresses. And Captain of the Watch will create 3 soldiers on ETB. The Commander also falls into this category. Not including the Commander, that rounds out to 22 cards, which is a solid number, and gives you over an 80% chance of starting the game with one of these pieces in your starting hand. That said, most of these plays either don't have an immediate impact or cost 4 or more mana to get those creature tokens. With the current setup, you should be prepared to take the game at a slower pace. Rather than jabbing at life totals with early aggression, you can chill for a little while you establish a board to start throwing haymakers later on. Let's head into the Armory to get our creatures strapped for the upcoming battle. We touched on Securitron Squadron with its counter distribution to token creatures. Overseer of Vault 76 gives out counters, but to all creatures, along with Vigilance when 3 quest counters are removed. Heroic Reinforcement is a temporary power and haste buff. Marshal's Anthem provides a standing +1/+1. Vault 75 Middle School distributes counters for a couple of turns, and Captain of the Watch provides +1/+1 and Vigilance. Spells we haven't seen yet include Intangible Virtue, offering creature tokens a standing +1/+1 and Vigilance. Colonel Autumn has Exploit, and shares Exploit with other legendary creatures, distributing +1/+1 counters to every creature you control when you choose to exploit a creature. Elder Arthur Maxon gives your creature tokens training, giving them +1/+1 counter upside when attacking. Fervent Charge provides a +2/+2 buff to creatures you control, but only when attacking. Sierra, Nuka's biggest fan, turns sacrificed food tokens into temporary raw power and toughness, based on how many quest counters she has accumulated, collected by dealing combat damage to a player with any creature. You don't want to go overboard with this section because the Armory only helps if you have creatures to equip. And for that reason, with these 11 spells, I'd say there's solid support in the Armory, with over a 55% chance to start with a piece in your opening hand. Unfortunately, just like the recruiters, many of the pieces need time to get their value or cost 4+ mana. The Vanguard consists mostly of creatures we've already seen, except for Butch Deloria, Tunnel Snake, and Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty. The Tunnel Snake is a menace creature that gains power when attacking, based on the number of rogues and snakes you control. This deck doesn't fall into either of those categories, but Butch can solve that problem, letting you pay 2 mana to give another creature menace and making it a rogue. Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty wants to be leading the charge with at least 2 other creatures. If that happens, you can draw a card and put a tapped and attacking creature from your hand onto the battlefield if its mana value is equal or less than the Paladin's power. The remaining Vanguard members are Gary Clone, gaining power when attacking alongside other Gary clones. Aradesh the Founder, who gains double strike and can draw you cards when attacking. Boomer Scrapper, that creates junk when attacking. Ruthless Rad Rat, which is largely go wide assistance and sacrifice fodder. Thrill Kill Disciple, that creates junk when dying. And Wasteland Raider, whose value already came when entering the battlefield. You need to be attacking with this deck to trigger Caesar, and besides the token creatures you'll be sending into battle, you can feel good about sending these 8 creatures to the front lines as well. Finally, there is the Elite, the Legion itself. There are 4 non-creatures here that we've discussed already. Deadly Dispute, that can destroy your own creature for value before an opponent does. Bastion of Remembrance, that drains each opponent whenever a creature you control dies. Battle of Hoover Dam, that can revive creatures or power them up. And Black Market, that turns dead creatures into black mana. Turns out at this point we've also talked about plenty of the creatures in this section. Boomer Scrapper isn't afraid of combat, but also gains counters whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield. EDE Lonesome Eyebot wants you to swing wide to get those quest counters, leading to more drawn cards. Elder Arthur Maxon gives all your tokens training, encouraging them to stay on the offensive, but also is a free sacrifice outlet, making himself indestructible. Morbid Opportunist likes to stay back to draw you cards when creatures die. Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty wants you to get your creatures swinging. Rose Cutthroat Raider gets you that junk when attacking different players. Sierra, Nuka's biggest fan, gets quest counters and food when you deal combat damage to players. And White Glove Gourmand also gets you food, but only when a human you control dies. That's pretty gross. This only leaves 3 new cards to go over. Windbrisk Heights is a hideaway land that encourages you to attack with 3 or more creatures to play whatever spell you hid for only that 1 white investment. Craig Boone, Novak Guard, wants at least 2 creatures to be attacking to get 2 quest counters. When that does happen, he can deal damage equal to the number of quest counters to a target creature, unless its controller decides to take it on the chin. And last but not least is McCready, Lamplight Mayor. He gives your smaller powered creatures, including himself, Skulk, and also drains your opponents 2 life for every creature with 4 or more power that attacks you. This is a quality roster of 15 value pieces that will make sure your combats never go to waste. You've got about a 70% chance to have one of these in your opening hand, and funnily enough, these are the cards on the cheaper side, with 2/3 of them costing 3 or less mana. And now it's time to answer that all-important question. Can this deck compete and win games at a pre-con level? The short answer is yes. The long answer is that it often won't be in the super aggressive, warring nation, big D energy type way you may have been expecting when clicking on the video. I said it before, but it bears repeating. The deck is generally slower than that, and demands a more measured approach, peaking in the mid-game with a late game that will be able to seal the deal. This deck has the tools to not be overrun early on with a larger than normal interaction package, to pick off high priority pieces and reset the board, or mostly reset the board, early into the game. Legate Lanius, Caesar's Ace, is one of my favorite cards to see in the opening hand, as it will set everyone back and give you a big blocker. Having this interaction and supplementing it with some of your ramp pieces will buy you time and get you the resources you need to start squatting up those creatures. Get your creature tokens on the battlefield and have them prepared for war. The thing about Caesar Legion's Emperor is that early on in the game, the creatures he makes will only be 1/1s, both of them liable to be destroyed as they enter the battlefield, tapped and attacking. The drawn card is great, but costly if you can't guarantee any other creatures living through combat. And that direct damage to your opponents is only gonna tickle. You need to pick your moments when casting this commander to make sure you get your value the same turn. That'll often be closer to turn 6 or 7 than it'll be turn 4. But then you'll be off to the races with a deck that does a good enough job pumping out creature tokens and buffing them up to both increase Caesar's direct damage and threaten wide attacks. Not that those wide attacks are necessarily advised. In the later game, this play pattern holds, happy to rely on Caesar doing most of the work when he's on the battlefield, with his army ready to jump into the action exactly when he needs them to. The deck could use a few more finishers, and definitely could use more protection to keep Caesar and his army safe, but the Hail Caesar Precon can and will grind out victories. And what a segue opportunity into the upgrade portion of the video. For you today, there will be 10 added spells for less than $10, followed by the culling of the week, also known as 10 cuts. And let's start right where we left off, with Protection. Unbreakable Formation is a 2-and-a-white instant that'll cost you about a quarter. This spell flat out makes all your creatures indestructible for the turn. It also has some flexibility for you to use this offensively. If you cast it during your main phase, your creatures also receive a +1/+1 counter and vigilance. In this go-wide strategy, those additional points of power can add up. But to be clear, the best use for this is protecting your creatures from a board wipe, or even keeping Caesar safe from targeted removal. If you want to get serious about upgrading this deck, there's room for additional pieces of this nature, like the multi-purpose Boros Charm, and possibly free Flawless Maneuver. Another truly budget option to consider is Root-Born Defenses, since you are doing token things. Copying a 1/1 soldier is super meh, but another Wasteland Raider or Securitron Squadron starts to get exciting. Rabble-Rousing is a fun and unique finisher enchantment in this deck, due to how you can manipulate the attack triggers on the stack. You want to stack it so this trigger resolves before Caesar's attack trigger, because this spell has the upside to double the amount of creatures you control by way of creating 1/1 creature tokens. The exact kind of creatures that feed Caesar's third damage to face ability, on top of the surprise 5 or 10 damage that can snowball into subsequent turns. This also has Hideaway 5 that triggers after you create your tokens, if you control 10 or more creatures. Hideaway triggers when entering the battlefield, letting you look at the top X cards of your library, in this case 5, choosing one to hide away under the enchantment to cast when the condition is met. The other cards go to the bottom of your library. Rabble-Rousing is only 80 cents. Might as well talk about Othari, Sun's Glory, while we're talking about interesting ways to manage the stack and ways to close out games. This is a 5-mana creature with flying, lifelink, and haste, with the always fair experience counter mechanic. You'll get one of those counters whenever he attacks. Then he'll create a number of tapped and attacking 2/2 rebel creature tokens equal to the experience counter total. Again, you can stack the attack triggers to have Othari resolve before Caesar. Importantly, this can give you a creature to sacrifice if you didn't already have one. Othari can also be reanimated from the graveyard, using your rebels, with those experience counters remaining, even if the creature is removed. The incidental life gain is a nice feature, and this creature will be a problem if left unanswered. Othari will cost you 80 cents. Let's make a quick pit stop to add in Felwar Stone. Tapping for anywhere between 0 and all 3 of your colors, this will start your game off on the right foot. Normally, a strong play pattern with a 4-mana commander is turn 2 rock into turn 3 commander. Despite all the tempering of expectations I did previously, that still can be the correct play if you've got the right things in hand to follow it up. Just play it smart. Consider what the board is going to look like and definitely snag the Felwar Stone for 80 cents. Oketra's Monument is pulling a little weight for ramp and a little more weight in creating creature tokens. The first ability, reducing the casting cost of white creature spells by 1 mana, will affect 15 of the 28 total creatures in the upgraded deck. That passes the needed threshold for me, especially considering the vigilant creature tokens this will be creating whenever you cast any creature spell, not just white ones. This introduces easy sacrifice fodder, passively helps you get wider with tokens, and makes your deck faster. There's not a whole lot to dislike about this artifact. Oketra's Monument is right around $1.70. Staff of the Storyteller is adding in even more value. This 2-mana artifact starts out by putting a Flying Spirit token onto the battlefield. Because you created that creature token on ETB, you'll also be able to put a story counter on the artifact. From then on out, whenever you create 1 or more creature tokens, the staff will gain another counter. Tap the staff, pay a white mana, and you can turn a story counter into a drawn card. You're not likely to be short on story counters, so you'll always have a card waiting for you when you want it. Staff of the Storyteller is $1.70. Felidar Retreat is the last value add spell, costing 3 and a white, giving your choice of 2 options when you hit a landfall trigger. The first one makes cat beast creature tokens, and the second gives all your creatures a +1/+1 counter and vigilance until the end of the turn. There is never a time where neither of these options will have an impact. generally with the first helping out more early and the second helping you to close out games. The reason I like this so much in this precon specifically is because it comes with those 3 fetch lands out of the box. That's at least 2 triggers for each of them. Throw Keeper of the Accord into the equation and this enchantment will be much more than a couple not so cuddly kittens. Felidar Retreat is 70 cents. Dire Tactics and Chaos Warp are the 2 removal additions, and let's start with the latter. It's one of Red's best spells, full stop, able to remove any target permanent. If you're using it properly, that revealed card will almost never be as scary as your target, and if it is, you were always meant to lose that one, I guess. Dire Tactics is a black-white instant that exiles a target creature. All the humans in this deck are coming in handy now, because if you control a human, that's all there is to the spell. If you don't, you lose life equal to the targeted creature's toughness. The deck is almost completely human creature spells. Most of the tokens are soldiers or warriors, but there's also a couple ways to make human creature tokens too. All this to say, very frequently, this will simply exile the creature, and I love to see that. These 2 spells are $1.80 and 10 cents respectively. And it's only $1.80 because I think it's worth splurging on the full Fallout art. I really enjoy it. Otherwise, you can get it for less than $1. The last edition is Caves of Koilos. This one is pretty self-explanatory. It gives you the option to tap it for a colorless, but will also tap for your 2 most prominent colors at the cost of 1 damage. Having an additional land that comes in untapped and fixes your mana will help make your games play out smoother. Caves of Koilos is roughly 80 cents. Survivor's Medkit is going to be the first cut. I don't dislike the card, but I'm not the biggest fan of these gadget artifacts if the artifact itself has no value, and in this case it really doesn't. For example, I am a fan of Ransom Note in the Deep Clue Sea. Morska could turn it into a second card for 2+1/+1 counters. Tangletrove Kelp could turn it into a 6/6 creature, and it gets exalted with Merchant of Truth, and the list goes on. All Survivor's Medkit has is a couple decent mana sinks and some defense against a hyper niche mechanic. Mr. House, President and CEO, is the other commander option, and these days that usually means they don't jive too well with the main commander, and that is the case here. The whole die rolling thing is not what this deck wants to do, and even though he can create those robot creature tokens, without an influx of treasures, that cost is what I would call a bad gamble. Thrill Kill Disciple is among the cheapest squad cards, mana-wise at least. Discarding a card on top of it, even with the junk token death trigger, is an ask I'm gonna say no to more often than not, especially since I cut 2 of the 3 recursion pieces that could make use of that discarded card. Speaking of, Desdemona, Freedom's Edge, and Marshall's Anthem are getting dumped. Feel free to disagree with me, and if you do, let me know in the comments, but I think these 2 are simply a distraction. I get it that it's nice to be able to interact with your graveyard, especially when you're in colors that do it quite well. But what it comes down to is, I don't think that these do it well, at least with Caesar. For a positive spin, I do think the artifact creature part of Desdemona's text will present some fun homes for her. Yes Man Personal Securitron will always make for fun moments in a pod, and will be every group hug player's new best friend. Problem is, this deck is not trying to hug things out, instead relying on violence as the answer. Entrapment Maneuver is next. I really want to like this card, and I'm sure you'll miss it when you're attacked by a solo, the Pride of the Hallclade. But the floor of this spell is too low, with the player able to choose the creature to sacrifice. And even if you wanted to be cheeky and target yourself, this deck is not packing a lot of toughness to make that worth your while. Heroic Reinforcements is kinda awkward. It seems like it has everything you want, but it's basically a win more card and a not so good one. Like, I don't want to cast this early to get 2 1/1s and maybe 4 damage. But then, later on, when I have a huge board and that extra power becomes meaningful, I'd want a little more oomph, you know? I didn't include it in the upgrades, but a spell like Shared Animosity is a budget option that is way more bang for your buck in that later game scenario, despite it not being ideal, with this deck running human creatures with soldier and warrior tokens. Vault 11, Voter's Dilemma, starts off really nicely with up to 3 creature tokens being created, but chapters 2 and 3 are a scary prospect. Your creatures aren't safe from being targeted, which is certainly less than ideal. And let's be honest, do you think you'll ever see a drawn card from those chapters? Stolen Strategy is the final cut. In decks that aren't expressly interested in casting their opponent's spells or owning their opponent's permanents, this kind of card advantage effect has fallen off for me. This one in particular only lets you cast spells. Granted, you can use mana of any color, but you can't play lands, and that kinda sucks. Last thing we gotta do is take a peek at that mana base again to make sure it still makes sense. With the addition of an extra land, bumping the total to 37, and taking into consideration the quick upgrade for pennies from the start of the video, the distribution of mana looks to be in a nice place as well. If this strategy of gameplay is speaking to you, using your creatures as a resource, sacrificing them to gain advantages elsewhere, be sure to check out the Blood Rights Precon Upgrade video, or as I like to call it, the Big Suck. I'll catch you next time for some more monkeying around.